President Barack Obama is set to give a speech tonight in which he will outline the case of both arming so-called moderate Syrian rebels and launching airstrikes inside Syria in the name of combating ISIS. And for the last month, we've heard propaganda about how if we had only armed the good rebels, the moderate rebels in Syria, then they could have fought off ISIS and this wouldn't be a problem. Well, here's the truth about ISIS. The vast majority of the rebels in Syria, as Colonel Tony Schaefer said on the Alex Jones show today, are not moderates. They're radical jihadists, many of whom collaborated with, defected to, and gave weapons to ISIS terrorists. It was the Obama administration's policy in the first place to arm Syrian rebels, in addition to the weapons they obtained via the US consulate in Benghazi, that led directly to the growth and spread of ISIS. Now Obama wants to pour gasoline on a raging inferno by pouring more weapons into Syria that will inevitably end up in the hands of ISIS terrorists. And in the article linked in the description below, you can read about innumerable examples of how these so-called moderate rebels, you know, the type who like to cut out people's internal organs and eat them on camera, that's how moderate they are, have fought alongside, have collaborated with, defected to, and given weapons to ISIS terrorists. These are the same militants Obama now wants to arm to an even greater extent. Obama is effectively planning to fight ISIS by arming ISIS, which of course makes no sense whatsoever. Here's an example. Bassel Idris, FSA rebel commander, quote, "We are collaborating with the Islamic State." ISIS fighter Abu Athiya, "We are buying weapons from the FSA. We bought 200 anti-aircraft missiles and Concourse anti-tank weapons. We have good relations with our brothers in the FSA." These are the militants that Obama wants to arm. They're collaborating with, giving weapons to ISIS. It was so-called moderate rebels who sold Steven Sotloff, the beheaded American journalist, to ISIS. It was so-called moderate rebels that Obama wants to arm who fought with ISIS to seize the Menaj air base in Syria last year. In July, it emerged that, quote, several factions within the FSA, including Al-Attahar, Abin al-Qaim, had, quote, handed over its weapons to the Islamic State in large numbers and pledged allegiance to ISIS. The Syrian rebels that Obama wants to arm in the name of fighting ISIS are allied with ISIS. This is the lunacy of the administration's policy, just as we saw the lunacy of arming radical jihadists in Libya, conducting airstrikes, which ultimately led to Benghazi and the collapse of Libya as a failed state. Okay, second point. US airstrikes inside Syria, which Obama is set to greenlight tonight without any intervention, any consultation of Congress. This isn't about toppling ISIS, which the administration's policies helped build. It's about getting done what Washington failed to accomplish last summer in the aftermath of the dubious chemical weapons attack in Ghouta, which, as we know, an MIT report later confirmed was, in all likelihood, launched not by the Syrian government, but by the rebels themselves. This is about creating the casus belli to topple the Assad government. The Syrian government has stated on numerous occasions that it will consider any US military activity inside Syria as an act of war. How will Syria respond to US warplanes over its territory? We've seen Israel conduct airstrikes inside Syria with no response, but that was more over towards the border areas. What happens if Syria shoots down a US fighter jet? What happens if Syria activates Hezbollah to conduct attacks against Western interests in the region? Will the mainstream media wring their hands at the temerity of the Assad government to defend its own country? Will this then be used to grease the skids for a full-scale assault on Syria? Will this fan the flames for a regional conflict? Even aside from the fact that the US and its closest allies, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey and Jordan, who funded, armed and trained ISIS in the first place, are almost wholly responsible for the spread of ISIS, the fact remains that ISIS is now a real threat. How do we eliminate it? Well, as Rand Paul and others have said, the only logical course of action is to work with Assad, to work with the Syrian government to neutralize ISIS. But that's not going to happen because ISIS represents the most lucrative opportunity for the military-industrial complex and the most opportune reason for the US military to expand its presence in the Middle East since the aftermath of 9/11. ISIS are the best enemies money can buy because they provide the justification for re-energizing the long-term geopolitical goal of Washington, NATO and Israel, the agenda acknowledged by General Wesley Clark to isolate and surround the remaining, quote, rogue states in the Middle East, prime amongst them Lebanon, Iran and Syria. And that is the truth about ISIS.